great to be here with all of you and with Ruth Hartt, who has very kindly agreed to join us for this second DPP office hours that we've done in a week. It's one of the few times that we've done so many, but I appreciate everybody being here with us. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm a big fan.
And it goes both ways. So I know I said keep this for the end, but folks, sign up to Ruth Hart's newsletter because it's just so gorgeous and beautiful. You can tell she works with lots of arts organizations. But Ruth and I connected several months ago on LinkedIn, and I'm kind of a fan of a part of her work relating to a concept called jobs to be done and a whole lot of other frameworks that are super helpful. And I have the proof is in the pudding. I have one of the books here that you work with, I understand. So I was, kind of curious. I'd like to ask everybody who's here if you've heard about the jobs to be done framework, and maybe Ruth, if you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself, we'd love to learn a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Have you heard of jobs to be done theory? Because I had not. In all my 17 years leading up to joining the Christensen Institute. So the first 17 years of my career, I was an opera singer and a music educator. And, you name it, I've done it. I've sung with orchestras and opera companies and choirs, and I've directed choirs and musical theater productions and all of it. Wow. And then I kind of made a big career transition, and I landed at a think tank, which is not something I ever thought I'd say. But I landed at an administrative role at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. And it's a nonprofit think tank that takes these business theories, these really powerful theories that Clayton Christensen developed, and we apply them to social issues. So we are looking to try to transform education and healthcare and poverty and things like that. Wow. So I came on board, and after a while, after learning these theories and watching these researchers, I thought to myself, there's a problem back in my old world of the arts, which is audience decline. And, audiences of classical music performances have declined 50% since 1997, and actually probably more now that, COVID has hit us. It's even more dire. So I was really intrigued by, whether these theories, which were helping business thinkers and, other nonprofit thinkers, if this would help the arts as well. So that's sort of what brought me to create this sort of passion project of mine, which I call Culture for Hire.
Wow, that's amazing. And Barbara, do not despair. You'll learn everything you ever wanted to know about all of this today, courtesy of our expert here. But hey, tell us about this decline, because it's yet another decline. Of course, in the Donor Participation Project, we say there are fewer people giving to nonprofits. But you see that also a similar trend in there are fewer people volunteering in general. And now we hear from you that there are fewer people going to concerts.
Yeah.
Tell us, a little bit about this.
Yeah. So the data comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. This 50% decline since between 1997 and 2017. League of American Orchestras also says it's a 2.8% decrease every single year for orchestras. You look at how many people go to the movie theater. It's like 58% of U.S. adults will go to a movie theater at least once a year. It's 8.6% of U.S. adults will go to a classical music concert once a year now, and that was before the pandemic. And in opera, which is my world, it's like 3%. So it's small numbers and getting smaller all the time. And with the great acceleration of the pandemic, if that theory proves true, we may lose another 40%, which is really, it's adapt or die at this point, I think, for classical music.
Wow. What are arts organizations, thinking about this, doing about it?
It's a good question. I think there's been a lot of focus since 2020 on diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of thinking about the product, the repertoire and things like that, but we're not seeing any kind of shift in this downward trajectory. I think there's something missing, and that's where I think this job to be done theory comes into play.
And I've read in your newsletter that you actually think that organizations should think of the product way differently, right? That the
Mhm.
product is not what they think it is, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're not selling what you think the customer is buying, right? So, classical, I know, classical music organizations believe that customers are coming for the music. And when you put on the lens of the outsider, of the consumer out in the world that doesn't have a lot of context around classical music, you realize, oh, that's not why they're coming. That, they're coming for lots of other reasons, but their main motivation is usually not the art. Maybe for the 1%, of insiders and loyals
Mhm.
who are artists themselves, or grew up really, in a family that really appreciated the arts. But for the most part, our audiences, or our target audiences, really have no context for the world of classical music, and there's other things that are motivating them.
Okay, so this is kind of where you've, your career took you into a place where you discovered these theories that, I mean, is it accurate to characterize them as tools for innovation, or is it
Oh,
just
absolutely.
innovation? Okay, so
Mhm.
these theories that help with innovation, thinking about innovation, and you started applying it to your world for all the fundraisers that are here today. What I found, super appealing about Ruth's ideas was that there were lots of parallels with fundraising. So
Mhm.
sometimes I get feedback about these sessions that we do on LinkedIn that they're not super practical. What do I have to do when I get back into the office? So today is one of those where it's kind of a more of a we're trying to find parallels and connections. But maybe for those who haven't heard about jobs to be done or any of the other theories, is there a way that you can provide an overview?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I will, and I love a good slide deck, so I'm going to share a few slides as well. So let me share
thank you.
that. Let's see here. Uh,
This is where you can tell that we're live,
yes.
um, and there's no faking it. So whatever questions you have, if you want a true, honest answer from Ruth, post it in the chat right now.
So it looks like the system isn't going to let me share. It says something about permission to record, and I don't know if that's something, Luis, that you can toggle. But no matter what, we will give an overview.
Yeah, and Ruth, if you care to email the slides
Mhm.
to me, I will put them on the screen. I don't know what, the wonders of
Absolutely.
technology. So who is listening today that has never had a problem with technology in a donor meeting?
Totally. Yeah, no worries at all. So yeah, here we go. The framework of jobs to be done theory. It really is a way of looking at the world. And what I
Mhm.
have found is that it matters for nonprofits in a number of different ways. First, for marketing, and obviously marketing is not that far away from fundraising. So um,
Mhm.
the main reason the jobs to be done framework was developed, it was developed to address limitations, the limitations of market research. Basically, researchers were finding that all the data in the world wasn't answering the questions they had about why a consumer would buy a product, why a consumer was motivated to do anything, really. And focus groups also, just didn't dig deep enough to get to the bottom, to get to what Clayton Christensen calls the causal mechanism. What makes someone do something, and
Mhm.
how are we going to create the right products, or innovate, right? And how are we going to market effectively unless we truly understand the context of a real customer, over and above all this data that we have about them. And so, Jobs to be done tells us you need to have a bigger picture of a real customer's context, the circumstances they find themselves in that prompt an action, like a purchase or a
Okay.
donation. What are they struggling with in their lives that they need to make progress on, that we can help with? So, Clayton wrote, unless you understand the full context in which customers are making a choice to hire your product or service, you will be likely to create the right offering for them. And I would go further to say you will be unlikely to convince them to donate or convince them to buy.
Okay. So when he says hire your product or service,
Yeah.
um, like that is like, somebody's making a donation, they're hiring the nonprofit to do something for them, even if it's emotional, spiritual, whatever. No? Is
Yes,
that what it means? Okay.
exactly. Yeah, and so jobs to be done in a nutshell is this. We don't buy because of who we are, and you can, insert the word donate for buy.
Okay. Yeah.
We don't buy because of who we are, because of our age, our ethnicity, our income level, our shoe size, or even our past habits. We buy because of who we want to become, or what we want our lives to be like, or what we want our world to be like. So in other words, we're pulling these things into our lives, whether it's a product or a service, or, a funder, we're hiring them to help us make progress on something in our life. We're trying to solve a problem, or trying to improve ourselves, fulfill an aspiration, in a particular set of circumstances. And so that job, or that progress, we call the job to be done. So, like in classical music, I like to give the example of, like, let's say there's a grown child who has an elderly mother who wants to give her a gift that's a little bit more meaningful than, just a bouquet of flowers or something like that. So she's going to hire the orchestra, and she's going to buy some tickets so that they can go together and have this meaningful experience together. You've helped that consumer make progress on this need in her life, right? To have this meaningful gift for her mother.
I love it, and I love how you're separating identity from kind of that desired state. And lots of times in fundraising, we kind of tend to default, well, this person is philanthropic, or or they aren't. And I've always found that explanation lacking, because somebody who's not philanthropic in theory, then you find them being extremely philanthropic in another context.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you're shedding light on. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And this is such a game-changing perspective, I think, especially for marketers, but I think also for fundraisers, because it kind of reveals this truth, which it's kind of a bit of a harsh truth, but consumers don't care about you. They don't care about your product, or what you're trying to do. What they most care about is solving their job to be done, or many jobs to be done, because we have more than one in our lives, right? And there are so many different ways to solve that job to be done, to make progress on that need. And we're just one of many, right? So we have to really understand, what it is that drives current consumers, or current donors, to whatever they are, to actually make that choice to choose us, to help them with that progress they're trying to make. And if we don't really understand the context around their circumstance, their emotional context, their social context, the functional needs that they have in their lives, we're not going to be able to market effectively. We won't be able to signal to them that we get them, that we understand them, and we empathize with them, and that we have like the best solution for them, for that particular, need or job to be done in their lives.
Yeah, and I think this resonates with so many different things that you see in fundraising advice. Like, you need to make people feel valued and seen, right? And this is part of that. Do you find, Ruth, that there are common threads? And for example, in classical performance, classical music, and Bree has a really good question in the chat, interested in hearing what jobs classical performances can fulfill. Is this very unique to each organization, or do you see common threads across the industry?
Yeah, I think there are common threads. I mean, I think, one of the ones that I think music, I always say, what need do we see in our community that we are best positioned to address? So one organization that I was working with, we looked at some of the consumer data that's out there post-COVID, if we are post-COVID yet. And consumers are prioritizing different things now. They're prioritizing health and, self-care and mindfulness. They're also, looking at sustainability and, responsibility and things like that. And so this particular, it was a sacred choral ensemble. We decided what we're best positioned to address is this need for, we call it space to breathe. So when you hire a sacred choral concert, you get this transformation in her life, which is, an hour or two of just space away from the pressing in of the world, the pressing in of politics and COVID and the stress of life. And so that was one particular need that we felt we were best suited to address. Other organizations might look at the epidemic of loneliness. I mean, that's a huge problem in the world today. And that's something we can address, not necessarily with the product, but with the audience
Well,
experience. I mean,
yeah,
when you come
exactly.
together, you can innovate around that need. You can create all different opportunities. There's all these different opportunities to connect your audiences at a concert that you
Well,
wouldn't
and
normally.
donors are typically in that demographic that is suffering from that loneliness epidemic. So
Mhm.
there's so much that's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. There.
Fantastic. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I could go on and on. I mean,
No,
there there are so many different, motivations you can look at. And I think a lot of times the best way to figure them out is to sit down with your customers. And this is
mhm.
not like a focus group type of situation. This is actually one-on-one for an hour. And you're not talking at all about your product or your company, but you're talking about the customer and their needs and their circumstances and what they're struggling with in their lives. And you start to see patterns as you talk to more and more of these, I'll say, donors.
Mhm.
You start to see patterns of what people are struggling with, and how your program can fit into that and help them make progress.
Okay, let's do a little bit of pseudo research here. If anybody that's joining us today is inspired to share a job to be done, so why their donors, what are they looking for from their nonprofit? That would be super interesting to hear. But Ruth, as a layman, it sounds like it's a powerful concept that's fairly easy to understand, but you
Yeah.
started mentioning the research and like execution of this concept and turning it into a business thing, something that's going to help your business, either as a nonprofit or a for-profit, seems I mean, I almost feel like you have to turn into an anthropologist.
You really do. That is actually, it's almost like an investigative reporter, right? You're
Hmm.
always, when you do sit down with these donors or customers, you're always asking why. You have to keep asking why until you get to the real bottom of what it is they're trying to make progress on.
Hmm.
Um, and on top of that, there's other things to consider. There's what we call the jobs to be done timeline, which shows us that not every single consumer is ready to make a purchase or ready to make a donation, right? So
Okay.
there's 5 different stages, and you have to sort of figure out what stages your donors are in, and you have to target each one of those stages. You can't just assume. This is such an important concept for classical music as well, because so many
Hmm.
classical music organizations, as soon as someone comes to a concert, they start bombarding them with
We have
emails.
their emails.
Yes,
Ask them for
yes.
everything.
Come back, become a subscriber right away, and also donate, and not
And
everyone is
marry
on
us.
not everyone is on that part of the timeline. They're just sort of maybe passively looking for something that might help them with their job to be done, right? Or trying to
Okay.
decide. So that's another aspect. And then the one I think we should dive into a little bit is the forces of progress, which I think you were interested in talking a little bit about. Forces of progress is another element of jobs to be done, where it talks about how there are forces that are pushing a consumer towards doing something or choosing a product. Like I have this struggle where I want to make progress, right? There's
Mhm.
also forces about the new product that are pulling them, sort of that magnetism towards the new product. But you also have the habit of the past, like inertia around, like, I don't want to change what I'm doing. And you have
Mhm.
anxieties about taking on this new action, or
Okay.
taking on this new solution. And in classical music, this may prompt some things for the fundraisers that are listening. In classical music, there's all these anxieties for people who are new to classical music. What do I
Mhm.
wear? When do I clap? How do I behave? Am I going to look stupid? All of these different things that people are not sure about. Am I
Mhm.
going to fit in? Like, do my values align with this particular organization? And so
Mhm.
unless you address those anxieties, and sort of alleviate them, you're not going to be able to convince someone to take a step forward towards your product, or your making a donation.
Okay, so is friction a part of one of those forces? And like transaction friction?
Oh, that would be probably maybe an anxiety, right? So, is this
Hmm.
going to be hard to do? Is this going to take more time than I have?
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's maybe workshop. How does this apply in the context of a nonprofit donor, which is, will I feel welcomed or thanked well enough? Is the money going to go into a dark hole, or am I actually going to have a sense of whether it's doing what I want it to do?
Right.
Um,
All of the above, absolutely. And I think nowadays too, consumers are making decisions a lot more based on values, and so
mhm.
signaling what your values are as an organization and what you believe in, and that's also a way to alleviate some of these anxieties, because people will say, okay, you know, we align, like they get me, they get what my priorities are. I think I trust them, and I think that's a huge part of it.
Okay, so something I really liked in reading the book that I shared earlier was how, um, of course, businesses think in terms very often in terms of products and services, kind of like modular things that they offer. So if they identify one job, they'll offer one thing, a product, a service, package to somebody. And when I'm thinking of how do we apply this in our context, in nonprofits and performing arts organizations, I find that we don't often think in those terms. It's more of like what we do. So we do the annual fund, or we
Mhm.
do the capital campaign. Um, you know, how should people think about this? So they're going, I'm thinking very practically. If you start to identify a job to be done, because fundraisers are speaking with donors all day, every day, and
Mhm.
if they have this mindset, what is the next step? How do people start tackling this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I believe is looking at your copy, looking at what you're
Hmm.
writing and starting to see when you're writing to solve your own needs as an organization,
Hmm.
and turning around to write in a way that you're proposing to solve the customer need. That's sounds, complicated, but really, one of the pieces of advice that I like to give out are how many times you're using the word you as opposed to we or us, right? If you start using the word you, that gets you thinking in a completely different way about, how to speak to the consumer. It actually gets you speaking to the consumer rather than sort of making these, formal proclamations. So I think marketing, I think when I talk to arts marketers, when I talk to classical music
Hmm.
marketers, I say you got to understand what's really matters to the consumer and identify how they interact with their world, and then filter everything that you do through those two aspects. And so when you're posting a social media announcement, pull in something that's relevant to these consumers, something that that they're dealing with or struggling with or thinking about in their lives, and frame it from that perspective, and it starts to just feel more real, more human centered, and a lot less
Hmm.
like egocentric, which is what I often see in the arts world is this really really egocentric approach where it's all about us and how great we are and how great our product is, but there's nothing there to like convince the consumer that we can actually help you make progress in your life.
You're finding so many things that we hear in different areas all the time. So that you versus we and I, that's fundraising, copywriting 101.
Mhm.
That's so interesting. The focus on our services, our programs, and
Mhm.
then many fundraisers who have to write letters for their executive director who make them about, the donor, and then get it all shut down and corrected because we need to talk about this thing we're doing, these 20 other programs, these experts that we have.
Mhm.
It's funny how our worlds are colliding.
It's so similar. It's hard. It's a really hard shift to make when when you're.
Hmm.
I always say, like in the arts world, we are insiders, right? I mean, there are
Hmm.
so many arts marketers who have been artists themselves, and they live and breathe this art, and it's sort of
Hmm.
a sacred thing for them, right? But it's really, really hard for an insider to actually reach an outsider and convince them to to participate, because they don't understand that perspective of not having the context around the art. And so it's really working to almost kind of forget everything you know and understand it as an outsider, put on the lens of the outsider and say, okay, no, I don't have context for this. So how am I going to think about it to make it relevant for these folks?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And from a change management perspective, when you go into an organization and you're working with people, you know, how, you know, what are the mechanics of helping them make this shift? You know, is it education? Is it working with leadership? Combine all of the above?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you're going to be successful in making this shift, everyone in the organization has to understand it. It really has to be, you know, from the top down, and the bottom up, really. I think, you know, what I will usually do is go in and provide an overview, you know, bring my handy slide deck in and just show them what this framework is. And then I think the most powerful thing is to provide case studies. And, you know, I've got case studies from the for-profit world. There are a lot of businesses out there that have made a lot of money switching to this more customer-centric approach. There are a few in the arts world, not that many, but I think the more people can see, okay, this has actually been successful. Here's the growth that other people have experienced using this approach. You know, that gives them a little bit more confidence. And just providing examples like this is, you know, I do this sort of like fixed it thing where I show like, this is the wrong way. This is the right way. So, you know,
this is what you think is happening. This is what's really happening.
Yeah. I mean, you know, as we come back from the pandemic for classical music organizations, the really popular, you know, approach is to say, you know, welcome back, or the maestro returns, or, you know, rediscover the power of music. But it's a lame approach. I mean, it's so vague and it doesn't speak to a real customer's like circumstance. And
Where
so
they are.
yeah,
I mean,
what they're actually dealing with. I mean, there are people that have been sitting on the couch in sweatpants for like 2 years, you know, like, let's talk about that. And with this sacred choral ensemble that I mentioned earlier, you know, it's what do we need? What do they need in their lives? They need space to breathe. They need like reinvigoration. They need inspiration. So let's talk about that. Like that's the actual benefit that you get from engaging with us as an organization. So just seeing the difference between the product center or the egocentric approach and then the customer centric approach really, I think, can be a light bulb moment for people.
So something really that I find really interesting is in the work that you were sharing with for-profit organizations, right? To some extent, you're discovering these jobs and you're able to re-engineer the product or create segments of the product to satisfy them. Not so much in nonprofits, right? Where sometimes the mission is the mission, and like in, you know, in an orchestra, it's really like you're not going to say customers want smaller orchestras because that satisfies their need for actually being able to recognize people, and that's not going to happen. You know, so other than, or have you found some success? I know you were talking about gathering and how the act of getting together and the audience experience can be a part of the product.
Yeah, I think that is the main difference. I think, you know, I actually was talking with a orchestra marketer who said, I came from the retail world, and the difference is that in the retail world, we make the product for the customer. In the arts world, the product is kind of like already there. So what matters then is how you innovate around it. And so it's all about, you know, so one of the books that I'm obsessed with right now is Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering. And I've already written 3 blog posts and had 3 live streams on it because it's so powerful. And it really is. I mean, you know, the things that she talks about are, you know, you have to have a meaningful purpose for a gathering. And so many people assume that they do have a meaningful purpose. If they're coming together to raise money, they're like, that's our purpose, right? Or if they're coming together to have a classical concert, that's our purpose. We're here to provide beautiful classical music. But she says that's not enough. Like, that's just the category. That's just the activity. What are you actually, like, what's the reason behind that? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the outcome you're looking for? And so, you know, that's probably the main thing. But she talks too about how, you know, gatherings are a lot of gatherings these days, you kind of opt to just sort of, as if you're the host, you opt to sort of be in the background. We call it chill hosting. That's her phrase for it. And she talks about how chill hosting ends up not serving your guests or your audiences at all, you end up not having a very meaningful event at all. So she walks you through how to actually, really innovate around like the format of your gathering itself. And it's so powerful when you start to think about, okay, I'm the host. This is like a social contract, and I'm responsible for delivering it in a way that actually is meaningful for the people who are here. And it starts to really change up how you think about every aspect of your gathering.
That's amazing. And there's some people I respect a whole lot that talk about giving through a nonprofit, not giving to a nonprofit. And I think that relates to that purpose, why are you, what change do you want to make in the world? And I think it relates to gatherings, right? What are we here for, rather than, what are we doing when we're together? So I have a little bit of a background in orchestras. And I do remember distinctly those post-event receptions. And those didn't seem to have a lot of purpose, other than people getting freebies, and because they were at certain donation levels, and they looked at what they got like hawks. I tell you, the purpose for them in life was to make sure they got enough cookies and free campaign. So how do you insert purpose into a gap, into that type of thing, and thinking of the loneliness epidemic that you mentioned at first, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, she mentions, I think it's like 7 things to really make sure you're thinking about. I mean, the first one is just naming your gathering, which you wouldn't think is that important. And so many folks, if they're having a gala, they'll just call it a gala, or, this is our 10th anniversary, whatever. Guess what? People don't care. They want to know what's in it for me. They really do. And that's just who we are as humans. So when you're naming your gathering, that's your first step in sort of drafting that social contract. So in that title, you have to signal what the purpose is and help them know what to expect and how to show up. So they already are preparing themselves, right? Just by seeing the title. Marketing the gathering is also another way to sort of frame what it's going to be all about, and what you're setting expectations for, how to behave and who's going to be welcome there, and how people can get value from the event, right? That's something you have to think about there, other than like the cookies, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And she talks about priming being a really important concept. Priming is really all about how do you prepare your guests to fully engage with the event and to actually, benefit from it. And I love how she talks about traditions versus innovations in terms of, expectations of behavior. Because she talks about how, the traditional sort of etiquette approach, especially this is so true for arts organizations. It's based on like 19th century, society. And the world has totally changed. So are we actually adapting to the way consumers behave and interact with their world today? If we're not, we got to really start to think about what that looks like for the 21st century. Ushering in your guests, helping them transition from their world to your world. And then, a big thing too, is she talks about how when you're launching your event, if you start with logistics, you're done already. Like it's all about, when you start, people are looking around and saying like, am I in good hands? Do I belong? Is this worth my time? What's going to happen here? And so launching your event, it's really key to launch it by, immediately sort of like searing the purpose for gathering into the minds of your guests.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on, but it's really all about, like thinking about what your guests need, what they're going to value, what they're going to walk away with just from that particular event. And I think, it's that same sort of like, what progress are they trying to make and how can we help them?
That's great. And so highly recommended a resource from Ruth Hartt, Art of Gathering. I was speaking with a fundraiser yesterday, and, a lot of sophisticated fundraising shops are very metrics dependent, right? And I'm thinking within the context of the jobs to be done. So if you've identified new jobs that need to be fulfilled that we're not doing well, right, for people, for instance, maybe providing meaningful gathering opportunities. for people. And he was saying, well, like, what's the metric for that? So, because you could have people in a room, so technically, checkbox,
Yeah.
but it could not be very meaningful, right? And then you're not fulfilling that job, which means that you're not going to see results at the end of the day, so the donations are going to be harder to get. But it just gets really messy, right, with these things, because there's a lot of qualitative kind
Yes.
of know-how, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier, right, to say, well, how much money did we bring in?
Exactly.
I mean, that's usually, right?
Exactly.
That's what would you that is, as an organization, that's your objective. That's your job to be done, I guess. So yeah, I mean, it really is, I think, starting to think about, well, did we satisfy, our donors?
Mhm.
Did we give them something of value that they're going to walk away with? And yeah, it's qualitative. It's a much harder thing to track, but I think it probably comes down to another conversation with them,
So I
calling
was
them
going
up.
to say, is that a survey, a follow-up interview? Yeah.
Certainly, yeah, certainly a survey is one way to go about it. And if you are, used to talking with your donors, I would imagine a conversation would be great as well. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, the more context you can get about
There you
how
go.
we
That's it.
satisfy their functional, emotional, and social needs, the more you're going to understand that, that you did help them. You did help them make progress.
Okay, and I'm throwing at you, Ruth, today all the parts where this whole thing breaks down, because I've been in nonprofits that had the best intentions, but there are different places where this falls apart. Okay, so then imagine you're doing all of that. So you are identifying jobs to be done. You are you're designing your communications and your product in a way that fulfills that need. You're talking with your donors afterwards. Um, how do you close that feedback loop? Because very often what donors talk about with their gift officers just goes into a database and dies there, unless they have a smart prospect researcher. So is that like a whole company, whole like does that go back into marketing? I'm just like really interested in the nitty gritty, right? So when you
Yeah.
get feedback, how do you make this a thing?
Yeah, when you get feedback, you gotta use it. I mean, I think that's the hard thing is,
Words of wisdom.
yeah, and I keep going back to arts organizations because this is the
Yeah.
world that I live in. But a lot of times you get feedback and it's not what you expected, and so you ignore
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Totally. All the
right?
time. Yeah.
So you might get the feedback, oh, I came to your concert because I wanted to bring my boss. I wanted to impress them, and that made me look sophisticated, and maybe I got the promotion I was looking for. I don't know,
Hmm.
but arts organizations are not used to thinking that way. They're not used to thinking, how can we innovate around that particular need? How can we help professionals,
Bring their
make progress in
bosses.
their careers, and so that particular piece of advice might be ignored. But if you take that advice, you can market with that, right? You can
Yeah.
tell a story with that, and you can create programs around that.
That's
Because
beautiful. Yeah.
if there's one customer telling a particular story, there's bound to be others that share that need or that story. So I think,
So, and
finding that.
you can have a promotion guarantee, get a promotion or your money back in the next 30 days. I'm joking.
Something like that. Yeah.
I mean, and this is like, to me, what's so easy and so hard about when I read these books as a kind of an outsider, right? I'm not so steeped in it.
Yeah.
It seems so common sense. So
Yeah.
yes, listen to the feedback, but then I just see time and time again how it doesn't happen. So
Mhm.
I hope you can bring many more case studies to us to inspire us.
Yes, I would love to. And I really, this is one of the first conversations I've had applying these ideas to fundraising, but I think it's like my next big thing. I want to delve into it more because I think it's
Please.
so relevant. And I think it's so powerful. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yes, absolutely. You shared a report with me, right, from the National Association of Independent Schools,
Mhm.
that had done some of this research.
Mhm.
So there is some of it out there. I don't know if you know about any other resources, or where should the fundraiser who's listening today go to learn more about this stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you really want to take a deep dive into business theory, so I would say, let's see, I started with competing against luck. which is a
Mhm.
Clayton Christensen book. And then that got me hooked. Then I stepped into, let's see, Demand Side Sales, which is a Bob Mesta book. And Bob Mesta worked very closely with Clayton Christensen. Both of those really, I mean, it makes your head spin the way all of a sudden you're looking at the world in a completely different way. Looking at the world from the customer's perspective, and the Art of Relevance too. I don't know if some of your listeners have read that one, but that's the Nina Simon book, just talking about how it's our responsibility to create the relevance that's needed to pull people in, rather than assuming they're going to find it, in our world. So those three are huge for me. Those, I would recommend those highly.
Well, thanks a whole lot, Ruth. It's been an amazing treat to have you today. For folks who want to connect with you, cultureforhire.com that I put on the screen a little while ago. Is LinkedIn a good place to find you?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we invite everybody to connect with Ruth and learn more and kind of get those parallel things. They say the best ideas come from a field that's not exactly yours, because then it's, same old, but also not totally alien. So hopefully you find lots of parallelism, and this gets you thinking. If you're joining the Donor Participation Project and this is your first encounter, we do a monthly lunch analysis on Zoom. These are kind of more like interview style, but we'd love to have you to our next one. Welcome, and feel free to connect with me, with Ruth, with anybody else. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.